Welcome everybody. This week's Torah portion is Parshat Tazria. Now, usually this parsha is together with Parshat Mitzorah, the next week's Torah portion. They are most often a double Torah portion, being that in a regular year we have more Torah portions than we have weeks in the year. And so we have to double up multiple Torah portions, especially because even to make matters even worse, as it were, is the fact that many times we have a holiday taking place on a Shabbat, which we bump out the Torah reading for a holiday reading, which means that, again, we have even less weeks. But this year is a leap year. And so, as a leap year, we have four extra weeks, and some of those doubled Torah portions get split apart, and we get to focus on each individual portion for itself. Parshat Tazria, it's interesting, talks all about the Mitzorah, this very interesting illness, right, known as tzara'at, which gets translated erroneously as
leprosy.
Leprosy. And no, it is not, right?
Right.
It is not leprosy. It is tzara'at. And tzara'at is not leprosy. And the vast majority of this Torah portion is to talk to us about this, all the details that make this individual a Mitzorah, right? If it's this, if it looks like that, it's really remarkable, the incredible amount of detail. What we come to see is that the Torah almost seems to take a certain delight in taking subjects that would seem to be obsolete are temporary by nature and really give us the nitty-gritty. For example, we talked about that we devote 4 complete Torah portions to talking about the tabernacle, the Mishkan, right? Which was, by definition, temporary. Yes, a lot of the structure and the vessels of the tabernacle were later repeated in the Beit HaMikdash, but a lot weren't. So all the details about the things that were Mishkan specific were known to be only 40 years worth of relevancy. They were by definition going to be obsolete within 40 years, and yet the Torah gives us 4 Torah portions devoted to that discussion. And even the temple, God obviously knows the span of history and knows that a majority of our time, the Jewish people's time before the coming of Mashiach, will be in an era without a temple. And yet the Torah chooses to go into great detail about Mishkan.
Why do you call it tzara'at temporary?
So now tzara'at is an illness, is a spiritual illness that only existed for apparently as long as the first temple era. It seems to be that, at least from scripture, etc., there was not necessarily a case of tzara'at in the second temple era either. So that tzara'at becomes a memory after the first temple era. And this parsha goes into incredible detail about how to define this tzara'at. If it looks like a burn, if it looks like a blemish above the skin, below the skin, if it's discoloration, if it has a reddish tinge, if it has a greenish tinge, if the hairs are changing from black to white, if they are changing to yellow, if it is spreading, or if it is remaining static, if it becomes on the aftermath of getting a burn, if it comes on the aftermath of getting another skin illness, if it is on your clothing, if it is on the house, all these details about and to the point where it bleeds into next week's Torah portion, which is actually called Mitzorah, even though the primary focus of the Mitzorah is in this week's Torah portion, which is called Tazria. And next week's Torah portion, we talk about one aspect of tzara'at that is not on a person, it's on a building, and that building is not called a Mitzorah, the person that's called a Mitzorah is talked about in this week's Torah portion. So it might get a little confusing, but the point, to come back to the point, again, the Torah seems to take something that really has no relevancy for the vast majority of the Jewish continuity, and spend a tremendous amount of time telling us about it and all its detail. Because Les challenged us to find a connection, in a sense, what can we learn as a lesson from it? Let's take a very important lesson from this week's Torah portion, connect it with the times, and from there also then move into a discussion a little bit on Mount Pesach on the other thing that Les mentioned. See, we can tie it all together with some rabbinical magic here. Okay. So we've talked about this point. You may have heard this, but I think this is part of the answer. The name of this week's Torah portion is Parshat Tazria, which connotes something positive, not just something positive, but something hopeful, not just something hopeful, but life, right? The greatest positive, hopeful thing there is. Isha ki Tazria, right? A woman who comes with seed, right? Is there anything more beautiful than the beginning and hopeful as the beginning of life and the potential
It
for
means
life?
pregnant?
Yeah.
Sarah.
Mhm.
Isha ki Tazria. That's the beginning of this week's Torah portion. V'yalda, and then she gives birth, right? Isha ki Tazria, a woman who becomes with seed. V'yalda, and she gives birth to a boy. She goes to a girl. And the first reference, by the way, is in this week's parasha, the first mitzvah, as it were, that's mentioned in this week's parasha, is the fact that a baby boy needs to have his brit at 8 days old, which is, again, something so foundational, so fundamental to Judaism. And interestingly enough, again, we give half a verse, or you can call it a full verse, one verse. And then this thing about Sarat is the rest of the whole Torah portion. But we decided to name the parsha about this kind of moment of positivity and hope and life, when, to a certain degree, the rest of the parsha talks about, one could call it the exact opposite. The Tzara'at, the leprosy, the skin illness here. It's interesting that the Torah itself does not define it as the punishment for gossiping, for Lashon Hara, but we know that it is an incredibly severe spiritual malady. What do we mean by incredibly severe? A severe spiritual malady. The individual there is no indication that the individual suffers any physical pain, discomfort, or a negative impact from this issue, this malady on his skin, which is one of the reasons why it is for sure not leprosy. Leprosy obviously is a very severe and painful and a debilitating and deleterious physical illness. This is not that. All things considered, the way the Torah talks about it, it doesn't seem to cause any physical issue whatsoever.
Rabbi, it seems like then it would be because of for public shaming purposes.
Rather, it's considered an incredibly severe and a very severe spiritual malady, because it is considered a level of impurity that is more severe than any other type of impurity. We know there are various gradations of impurity. An impurity that removes you from being on the Temple Mount itself, right? Then there's impurities that take, from the temple itself. Then there's impurities that take you off the Temple Mount, right? And then, like, for example, if you come in, if you nocturnal emissions or whatever it is, you cannot be in the temple itself, but you could be on the Temple Mount, right? If you have other types, but in a sense, the most severe impurity in that class would be the impurity of coming to contact with a dead body, right? That we said, for example, it's so severe that you can't just go to the mikvah and bring an offering and be tahor but rather you need to be sprinkled with the ashes of the para aduma, the red heifer, and we talked about that a couple weeks ago. And that is the process, only process in which you can become pure from coming into contact with the dead body. And yet, when you come into contact with a dead body and you become impure, the ramifications of it are that you're not allowed to be on the Temple Mount. You're not allowed to eat if you are a Kohen from Trumot to Maasrot, from the tithings, etc. If you are a regular individual, the bikurim that you bring up, the maser sheni, whatever it is, the fruits that you bring up to consecrated fruits that you bring up to Jerusalem, or the sections of the pieces, your portion of the carbonot of a goodwill offering that you're bringing in the temple, you wouldn't be able to eat. That's the ramifications of coming into contact with a dead body, with being, in a sense, suffering that level of impurity. But you are definitely allowed to exist among society. You can exist among society. You're definitely allowed to stay in what is referred to as Machane Yisrael, the Jewish camp, the Jewish cordon, right?
But you
Jewish
can't touch other people, can you?
What?
If you can't touch other people, right?
No, you can even touch other people. It depends on which state and which part of the impurity. But yes, there's what is called Rishon Latuma, Sheni Latuma, or Av Hatuma, Vitulda Latuma. Yes, you are right. There are gradations. Because somebody who's impure should not be coming into contact, should not be riding on something. Believe it or not, there's an entire section of the Mishnah, not one tractate. We're talking entire section. There are 6 total sections of the magnum opus known as the Mishnah, which is in the entire of Torah Shabbal Peh before it's broken down into the Gemara. Right? We talked about this, Paula. Right? So we have the Mishnah and the Talmud, and one of the volumes, 6 entire volumes of the Mishnah, is Taharot, all about purity and impurity, and the various. It's multiple tractates, so it is a very, very intricate discussion. And back in the days of the temple was something that everybody had to be very well versed in because it affected them in their day-to-day lives. Now, obviously, to a certain degree, we're all in a state of impurity. None of us has been sprinkled with the ashes of the red heifer. And so to a certain degree, it has become less prevalent, the gradations and protocols, because we're all anyway in a state of impurity, and none of us can bring an offering on the temple. In the temple, none of us can go on to well, by the way, that's the main reason we don't go on the Temple Mount. For those that are careful not to, this is the primary reason, because to go onto the Temple Mount, you cannot be impure in this way. And so we, while other nations definitely are not respecting the sanctity of the Temple Mount, we still maintain it and respect it. But coming back to this, Sara'at, while it doesn't carry any physical in a sense, impact on your let me put it this way: it doesn't carry any physiological impact. It, more than any other impurities, has a greater effect on your ability to exist in society. You are truly exiled. For as long as the tzara'at carries, you have to be beyond contact of any member of the Jewish population. You are
Rabbi,
outside of the.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
Is the word tsuris related to tzara'at?
It's Za'arot, maybe.
I would like to say it shares all the correct letters, but in a different order. Sa'ar is tzadik ayin reish, right? And sa'arot would be tzadik, which we get tsuris from, which is the Yiddish butchery of that word, right? Tzadik ayin reish vav taf, sa'arot, right?
Right.
Sara'at has the reish and the ayin flipped. Tzadik reish ayin taf. Not tzadik ayin reish, tzadik reish ayin, sara'at. So yes, the same letters, which, by the way, Kabbalistically means it's the same kind of DNA structure, spiritual DNA structure, but not exactly the same.
When you were talking about how heavy, how important tzara'at is to our lives, I'm trying to think, so what is that? What is that? It's Saras, but it's not. Okay, please continue.
Not that it's not, but perhaps in a sense. But let's in a sense let's play this thread out and see. Perhaps we can see some of that. I do want to make a point also that well, let's actually let the point kind of develop organically. But the result of Tzaraat, as we said, is that and one could therefore say its primary purpose is to mark an individual that you must be removed from society.
Right.
That's
right.
what it is. It is
Physical.
It is the
absolutely.
Jewish version of the fleur de lis, right?
Yeah.
It is your black mark or white
Yep.
mark in this case, right?
Yep.
It takes you out of society, and as long as this mark exists, you may not be in society. And in fact, we said that even on the way out of society, you must declare mitzora, mitzora, right? If anybody is on the way over to you on your way out, and even once you're outside of the Jewish loop, I'm using that word because it's a cute little anecdote from my father when he was the Chabad. When the one who founded and developed the Chabad in Potomac. So back in those days, when I remember Potomac was just starting to blossom, as it were. You know, you had Beth Shalom, it was still in the old building, and you had Chabad. This was before Young Israel opened. But people were starting to move into the neighborhood, understood the potential, whatever it was, because the Eruv had just been finished. And the whole Potomac now you're able to carry, and it's a neighborhood, yards, whatever it is, and a lot of Washingtonians are in a lot of Silver Springites, right, which was the big community as the community migrated out of Washington, kind of went to Silver Spring, and they're like, now we can afford the houses in Potomac, and started. So Potomac became particularly enticing. So it was the housing prices went up, more developers got involved. So it's very interesting because one of the developers, not a Jewish fellow, but just watching the marketing trends and the market, the housing market trends, realized something's going on in Potomac. So he did his research and he found out that a lot of Jews are interested in starting to raise the prices, etc. And he heard about this thing called the Eruv, and he had no clue what exactly it was. But somebody said, if you want clarity, you got to call the rabbi. So he heard that there's this ring, this thing of string, and it goes around. And if you're on the inside of it, it's great. If you're on the out, so he calls my father. Yeah, he calls my father, and he says, "Rabbi, how do I get into the Jewish loop?" He said,
oh.
So that's the story my father always repeats.
But what
the
does
Jewish loop.
Mitzora have to do with it?
No, so I'm just saying that somebody has the Tzaras is outside of the Jewish loop.
I see.
You have to be outside of the camp, on the other side of the area, right? You have to be out there in no man's land. And in fact, it's not just about your position, that you're not allowed to be inside the Jewish loop. You have to be outside the Jewish loop. But even there, you need to be in a state of exile, so that if somebody would approach you, you have to tell them, even as they're coming to you, Mitzora, Mitzora, keep your distance. So it was very devastating. Say it again? Sorry?
It was not nice. I said, unclean. It's from a funny thing happened on the way to the forum.
But that's what it was. Can you imagine in a Torah that is so careful to never, as Jerry pointed out, that is so careful about never allowing somebody to be embarrassed in public, right?
Right.
Very interesting that in terms of embarrassing somebody in public, we have what is the expression that the Torah uses? The Torah says you're not allowed malbin pnei chavero berabim. You're not allowed to whiten one's face in public, right? Malbin.
I want to say something. Twice, my daughter in lower school almost got thrown out of school because she stood up and said to a teacher who was abusing a student, "Public humiliation is not an educational tool."
Wow.
Twice. And they took her to the principal, and she got in all kinds of trouble. And I was called, and I said, "I'm proud of my daughter."
So as we said, right?
It's
but it's interesting.
Yeah.
What? No, it is. And the Torah acknowledges, it says, because the Torah chooses, why couldn't the Torah use there's a Hebrew word, levayesh. Why does the Torah not choose to use the more common term of levayesh, to embarrass somebody, but rather malbin pnei chavero berabim, which is a very long way of saying to whiten one's face, because the Torah is trying to make a point. You are guilty in a small amount of killing this person. Because why does their face become white when they're embarrassed? Their blood drains from their face. You have, to a certain degree, caused a certain, in a sense, a small amount of death to this person by doing this act of humiliation. It's to be aware, in a sense, of the severity of what you're doing. And so, as you said, public humiliation is something that the Torah is very, very, very careful about. And yet here we go, and we say, everything about this is very public. You're walking around literally with this mark, and you want to kind of, and the Torah warns against it's in fact a sin to try to cover up a tzarat, and the Torah promises that if you notice tzarat and you cover it over, then and try to avoid it, that will backfire, because the tarat will spread and will become even worse. So don't try to cover it over, but rather you're going to become the source. You're going to become a source of a public commentary. People are going to talk about you. You're going to be known. You're not going to be able to cover this.
Okay, but they're going to get it if they talk about you.
Good. Okay. So, yes. Well said. The point is that the Torah is, we know this as the idea of midah keneged midah, right? The Torah is very strong on this point, measure for measure. Now we know
It's not karma.
What?
It's not karma. It's different.
It's not karma. Not that it's not karma, but karma. The idea is not as it's not the exact same thing. It doesn't line up exactly in certain ways. Midah keneged midah is far more nuanced than karma, and in some ways it's a lot more simple than karma. Without knowing too much about karma, but it's in general we try not to reference. We'll call it midah keneged midah because that's Jewish,
Better.
and karma is not.
Thank you.
But having said that, tzaraat, as we know, the reason we know that it is associated with Lashon Hara is because of the one reported incident in the Torah, in the 5 books. Right, there are multiple references in the rest of Scripture. In fact, it will be the Haftorah for this week of about 4 Mitzoraim that ended up saving all of the Jewish people. The four, I'm not going to call them lepers, but the 4 people that contracted Sarat is this week's Haftorah, or next week's Haftorah, to double check. I think it's this week's Haftorah. Usually it's a double portion. It's definitely one. It's definitely the Haftorah. I have to double check if it carries this week or next week. But either way, the one incident of Sarat that we do have in the 5 books is who?
Miriam.
Miriam catches Sarat right after she does what?
Lashon Hara on
she talks
Moshe.
about Moshe behind his back, right? Talks negatively about Moshe behind his back. So we know Sarat. Okay. We know that it is a punishment for this. And the Torah goes out of its way.
Only?
What?
It's only Lashon Hara? That's the only way you get it?
It seems to be that is the only way that it ends up on an individual. Now on the house, it says there's multiple ways, multiple reasons that Sarah can end up on house, which is why it's put in its own Torah portion next week, because it's a standalone situation of Tzarat. There's a positive reason why Tzarat can end up on your house, but that I don't want to distract from our conversation here. Now, Tzarat, somebody speaks Lashon Hara, then a spiritual malady ends up flourishing on their physical body, which is again a unique thing. right? Somebody could be a heinous individual, a truly terrible individual, and for the most part, you won't be able to see it on their face, right? I once, I remember somebody remarked when, after the Twin Towers and all that, and they saw a picture of Bin Laden for the first time. They're like, wait a minute, he looks like a benevolent grandpa. This was one of the worst mass murderers in history, and you couldn't see it. Now, people say you look in the eyes, and then you have people that look evil. That's one of the things I notice, again, without getting all political, that pretty much every leader of Hamas looks like an evil man, right? They look like a person that you just know that they're evil.
They
But
look
that
like
doesn't always,
sociopaths.
right? But it doesn't always look that way. Again, I think if for the most part, take a look at Bin Laden, you're not necessarily. Now we are conditioned to look at his face and see evil. But if you had just seen his face just randomly, it wouldn't necessarily give off that vibe. But here's one of those unique situations where your spiritual illness ends up on your body, right? Ends up on the physical body. And interestingly enough, what does it end up? It ends up with a white spot. A white spot. Specifically white. And the thing is, because part of the biggest issue about Lashon Hara is the whitewashing of it. Why is it so insidious? Why is it so insidious? Because for the most part, people whitewash it, right? They say, not that bad, not that bad. I'm telling the truth, right?
Right, but
There's
that's
a
not
difference
a
between
defense
Lashon
of
Hara
the
and Motzi Shemra, right? Did anything that Miriam say did Miriam say something untrue about Moshe? And we say Lashon Hara can't be that bad. It's just words. It's not like it did anything physical to the person. And I'm just telling the truth. And that's why it's so dangerous. You can destroy somebody, and not just destroy somebody, but destroy society and the trust that people have in each other, etc. And you could be turning around and saying and patting yourself on the back and saying, I'm a good person. One of the biggest deterrents for misbehavior is the fact that there's no way we look in the mirror and be okay with it on the other end of it, right? If I punch somebody in the nose, right, it's a hard thing for me to kind of look in the mirror and say, yeah, I'm a good guy. I did a good thing today. It's right. Except for the old joke, you'll part of it is another one of these jokes, but it's one of the best because a certain fellow was on his way to Shul for Kol Nidre on Yom Kippur night, and he couldn't. He had a problem. He had a problem because try as he might, he couldn't remember a single sin he did the entire year. If he had to be honest with himself, he was a pretty darn perfect guy. So it's like, how am I going to connect with this Day of Atonement when I really don't have anything to atone for? So he's perturbed. He's heading to Shul on the eve of Yom Kippur, and he can't figure out a sin. So he comes up with a solution. He says, I'm going to commit one random act of violence on the way to Shul, and I'll have something to atone for. So he picks the door, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, picks the door on the block. He walks over to the door, bing bong, he rings the bell. Fellow opens the door, yeah, punches him straight in the nose. The guy hits the floor. What was that? And now he has a sin. So now he's committed a sin, an unequivocal sin. Now he can go and atone for it. He's walking down back towards the street, and all of a sudden the window on the second floor rolls up, and the wife of the household sticks out her head and says, "Sir, I don't know who you are, but I can't tell you what kind of mitzvah you just did." Right. So, anyways, certain things are blatant sins, obvious sins, and so sometimes in a moment of failure we are guilty of committing the sin, but our own conscience, and God blessed us all with a conscience, right? Hitler considered it a curse. We know it's a blessing, right? Our conscience oftentimes doesn't allow it to sit. Even if we try to justify it, then we're late at 2:00 in the morning when nobody's there and we're thinking about it. We oftentimes, the thing that motivates us the most as adults, not as kids, as adults, once in a sense our conscience fully kicks in and level of maturity, for the most part, and again, this is not saying from end to end, it's not a blanket statement, but in general, that conscience is, and that realization, that inability, in a sense, to deny the wrongness of what we've done is what becomes our primary, the primary factor in our our rehabilitation, our return. And this is very true. If you think about it, no matter how many consequences society puts in place or whatever it is, would always be the way to get around. The one that's going to be hardest to live with is yourself, and that's what holds you back from doing various things, from cheating in a way where you're pretty sure nobody will notice, or et cetera, et cetera. At 2 a.m, what's keeping you from going through a red light at 2 a.m, sitting there like a yold, right? Totally empty streets, no cars. For what is keeping you from? Because it's wrong. Because society's built on laws and rules, and that's red, and I stop. That's it. And perhaps because of the red light camera. But even if there is no red light camera, the point is that's our own inner conscience. What's very dangerous is something like lashon hara, which we think, right, is benign. It's benign. It's only words, and it's the truth, right? Honestly, perhaps I could even say the person deserves it, because if they didn't want anybody talking about them, about this thing that they did, they shouldn't have done it, right? And maybe what they did is objectively wrong, right? It's not even that I'm going to paint them in a light that that is unwarranted. It's warranted. But what you've done is entirely wrong. Lashon hara is entirely wrong. And so that whiteness comes back to bite you.
Robin Schneider.
That whiteness that is it fascinating stuff, is deeper than the surface. It says when you see it deeper than the surface. Because again, what you think is just superficial, right? It's just superficial. No, that's a very deep thing you just did. By speaking lashon hara, the impact goes significantly deeper, and you know that. That's, to a certain degree, that's why it's so juicy. Because if it was just the throwaway line or whatever it is, you wouldn't have been so ready to say it. So in a very fascinating way, as we talk about again, midah keneged midah, you're not just, in a sense, the most obvious midah keneged midah, measure for measure, which is that you took somebody else's hidden shame and made it public. Now you are the result of a hidden shame gone public. But also the tzara'at is a blaring message reminding you what you did. You thought this is white and this is superficial. No, this is, and therefore not a problem. It's deeper. It's deeper, and it's a malady, and it's an illness. And this illness will take you out of society. Having said all that, having recognized how dangerous and terrible lashon hara is, the Torah therefore knows that the tendency of this would be that in our zealousness to stamp out lashon hara, we might err to the side of such onerous, in a sense, enforcement, that this whole concept would backfire. The whole reason the Torah is so strict about lashon hara is because the Torah loves every one of us. By the Torah, I mean God, obviously. The Torah is just is God's word and will manifest. But God loves every one of us, including the sinner. Don't forget, the one who speaks tzara, the one who speaks lashon hara, right, is speaking it a truth. Again, this is a difference between lashon hara and motzi shemra. And Miriam was speaking a truth. Now she got it wrong, and that's part of the problem of tzara. Is that there's always context, not always context, but there is, as a general rule, more context to what you are giving over just this information. And so that's why Miriam was wrong. And also because it was none of her business and was definitely not her place to share it in a kind of in a public way. I heard a very good line from Sudi, right? Sudi, who's here, and I have to give credit. And I'm going to say it wrong. So Sudi, please step in and correct me. But they say that um, great people, great men, great people talk about ideas. Help me here, Sudi.
No, it's like you start with the little people. People talk about people.
Either way, so great people talk about ideas, average people talk about events, little people talk about people.
Right, right.
Is that, did I say, is that more or less, even if the order's incorrect, did I get that more or less correct, Sudi? I'm getting just static.
You're getting static. I don't hear anybody else. I don't think she's here.
No, she is. She is.
She is? I only see Carrie.
Can anybody?
Stealth mode.
We can
Now
hear
we're
you.
hearing. Yes, now we heard you, Sudi, for a moment. We just lost you again, I guess.
Okay, Rabbi, I give you the imprimatur. You got it pretty much correct.
All right. I'm not sure. I think the microphone is cutting in or cutting out. Sudi, but hopefully we didn't get it too incorrect. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Great people talk. I hear what you said. Great people talk about ideas. Average people talk about events, and small people talk about people.
Very good. All right. Yes.
Did you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, we did. Very good.
Thank you,
Right.
Sudi.
Yes. So that's why it's not in the place, even if what you're saying is valid, and even if you have the context correct. But why are you spending time talking about people? Right? When there's significantly more important subjects to talk about.
Right.
So, but here's the point. Here's the thing. Here's the thing. Even in the story of Miriam, the majority of the story, as it is told, not the story, I want to say the majority, but one of the important takeaways is so Miriam had suffered sarat, had to be outside of the camp. But what did Hashem, or what was done? What does the Torah say was done once Miriam caught the sarat and had to leave the camp? The people waited for her. They did not leave her behind. And here is a beautiful idea shared by the Rebbe. This is I repeat this almost on a yearly basis when we talk about this, but it's so fundamental and so quintessential Rebbe. Like, this is the hallmark. This is like a signature perspective of the Rebbe, because I haven't seen this from anybody else. And it really speaks to the incredible insight that the Rebbe has, channeling God's love of his fellow Jew. And the Rebbe says like this. It is a very fascinating thing. It says, when somebody believes that they have tzara'at, v'huva el ha-kohen, they bring it to the Kohen. Now the Talmud asks the obvious question. What happens if the Kohen, the only Kohen around to make this declaration, happens to know nothing about tzara'at and identifying it? Right? The only Kohen around doesn't know what they're looking at. Okay, maybe this Kohen took a different major in high school, right? How to barbecue the carbon ola. That's what they're thinking. He's a carbonologist, but he's not a tzaratologist, right? He has a PhD in carbonology, right? But he has no idea about tzarat. What do? So the Talmud says you need a tzaratologist, right? You need somebody who knows all the nitty-gritty about tzarat, who knows every last thing. about is right because the Torah, as we said, spells it out in minute detail. If you see it above the skin, below the skin, if it's growing, if it's not growing, if it's a reddish tinge, greenish tinge, if it's a yellowish tinge, if the hairs are changing, if the hairs are not changing, if you saw it after one has had a burn, or after one has any other skin, a tremendous amount of detail. So somebody needs to know how to take all these factors in and define it. Is it tzara'at or not? So the tzaratologist, so the Talmud says you must go to a tzaratologist, somebody who really can take a good look and know whether what they are looking at is in fact tzara'at or not. But then the Talmud says, what does the tzaratologist do? The tzaratologist cannot declare the verdict. The tzaratologist has to tell the Kohen, and the Kohen declares tahor or tameh. Why? Because the Torah says you have to take it to a Kohen. So now comes the obvious question. If the Torah is telling us if you have it this way, this, and this, it's tzara'at. And if it's this, and this, it's not tzara'at. So then what do we care if it's a Kohen or not? Whoever knows how to identify it, you make the declaration. No, the Torah says deliberately go to a Kohen. To the point where it's almost you get this like weird redundancy in here. The Kohen has no clue. It's the tzaratologist who knows. So how does this work? You go to the tzaratologist, and the tzaratologist whispers into the Kohen's ear and says, "Tameh," right? Right? He has tzara. To which the Kohen says, "He has tzara." You know, thank you very much. Right? What am I paying you for? Right? The tzaratologist did all the work, right? So why this step, this redundancy, as it were? Why this necessity to go to the Kohen and have the Kohen declare whether or not they are an expert in the field or not? And the Rebbe says a very beautiful and important point, because the very definition of a Kohen is the one who is the conduit of God's love to the Jewish people. It is a class of individuals that their primary role is to be the conduit of God's loving blessing to the people. What is the blessing that the Kohen makes right before they do the Birkat Kohanim? Right? Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, hamevarech et amo Yisrael. What's that last word?
Yahava.
Be'ahava, right? Yivarechecha, right? Ba'ahava, who blesses the Jewish people. No, that's not good enough. Hamavarech et amo Yisrael, be'ahava, with love. The Kohen needs to be not just the conduit of God's blessing, the conduit of God's blessing out of love, to the point, halachically, where if a Kohen has a beef with somebody in the congregation, the Kohen should recuse himself from giving the Birkat Kohanim. Because to this person, you are not a proper conduit of love. And so it's dangerous for the individual to receive a blessing from you, because it's an obstructed blessing. And it's dangerous for you to give the blessing if you're the Kohen, because at that point, you are not the proper conduit. A Kohen, by definition, is meant to be the manifestation of God's love to his people. Now we know why, of all people, God says, don't go to the judge. Don't go to the scholar. Go to the lover. In declaring the tzara'at, God says, I don't want the expert. I want the one who will try his best or her best to see if there is any possibility that we don't have to send this Jew to exile. Any benefit of the doubt, any way. Because too often, right, we've all had that kind of doctor that has miserable bedside manner, that is so arrogant in their knowledge, they just immediately write somebody off. Because I know what I'm looking at. I know what I'm looking at. And at that moment, you're not lamenting their lack of expertise. What are you lamenting?
Compassion, a lack of compassion.
The lack of compassion and the lack of empathy.
Yeah.
And the Torah says, in this case, it's not good enough to have expertise. You're about to declare on a fellow Jew that he has to go or she has to go into exile. That has to run through the Kohen. That has to run through the Kohen aspect. How often are we that quick? Are we that quick to pass judgment? And we feel that we are correct.
Too
That
often.
we have enough expertise in the
Yeah.
moment
Yeah.
to declare judgment. And the Torah says, no, 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 no. No, no, no. Did you put on your Kohen persona? Is it the Kohen within you that's making the declaration? Because even if it is the expert, even if I'm saying, oh, no, this is without any bias. I'm being agnostic. I'm being a scholar in this moment. I'm being an expert. I'm calling it like I say. I'm an umpire. I'm just calling balls and strikes as I see them. I have no predisposition to this matter, but I see it as I see it, and so I'm calling it. God says, no, be predisposed. I do want you to be predisposed. I want you to be biased. I want you to be a Kohen in these circumstances. I want you to find a way to give this person a benefit of the doubt to whatever degree possible.
But Rabbi, so you've gone through this process and you've made your judgment. It's not a snap judgment, it's a judgment based on fact and based on your intuition and all of your history. And then you put on your Kohen cap and you try, for example, to look at it from his or her point of view. Why did this person need to do this horrible thing that this person did? And it just ain't flying.
Then the Kohen who loves his fellow man, woman, his fellow Jew, knows then that the greatest blessing for this person is to go through this process of rehabilitation. Then it is out of love that the Kohen declares about this person Mitzorah. That is why the Parsha is called Parshat Tazria. Then the declaration of Mitzorah is actually the first seed of hope. And I'm doing it out of love for you. Out of love for you, I declare you Mitzorah.
Rabbi, do we have any narratives about what happens to the Mitzorah what happens to the Mitzorah? Is that what it's called? When he or she comes out?
Sure. They're completely
Are they
welcome
treated
back
well?
without a doubt.
Miriam.
Without a doubt.
Well,
Without a
Miriam was
question.
treated well, but I'm saying.
Of course. No, without a doubt. Again, the first person who would start treating the Mitzorah badly and say, hey, you know this guy was a Mitzorah. Guess what?
You're out. You're in.
Uh-oh. Right? That's the point. This is the way a society should function. Could you imagine if society functioned this way?
Bad guys would go to jail, and then when they came out,
Not
they
even.
would be
It's
judged
fascinatingly, Judaism does not really have any what's it called? Any value in jail. Jail is not very rehabilitative. Right? This is the one situation, and it's always a very relatively short sentence that a person is a Mitzorah. We don't like locking away a person for because who does that benefit?
society.
That's not real. It's interesting that in the American system we call a prison a correctional facility or a penitentiary. When it's not, really it is just we're going to throw you away and cut you out of society, and that's it. It used to be that we as a society were a lot more creative in trying to figure out a way to rehabilitate the individual. We take them out of society as long as they're a menace. But it wasn't so much punitive. years locked away in prison. Now we use prison as punitive. Like we want to punish you, so we're going to throw you away, we'll take you out of society. Then you just took somebody. Can you imagine if you're God, right? And you say, I gave somebody the potential to do positive things. He's right, he or she, I gave him a soul. They're part of the plan. And society, and this person does something that could be rehabilitated. I'm not talking about the really terrible people, because the Torah says there are times that somebody's life needs to end, right? They've gone so far, their life needs to end. But let's say somebody doesn't. So somebody stole or whatever it is. This is not necessarily somebody who's meant to be ostracized and excised from society for years and years and years. Wouldn't it be far more? Wouldn't it be better for society? Forget from a position of empathy, but even just from a practical and pragmatic. Wouldn't it be better to invest all the money that you're going to invest in just keeping this person in some space outside of society and trying your best to rehabilitate this person? And obviously do it with a clear eye, noting that this person ended up here because he did a very bad thing. But to see what it takes to
works. Only if it works.
Agreed. But maybe we're being a little bit lazy as a society. Instead of putting in the hard effort and trying to properly rehabilitate somebody, we're just saying, you know what, the easiest thing is just throw them away.
Well, yeah, but I know of two guys.
As I said,
Personally,
I'm
I
not
know of
talking
two
about extreme
guys
situations.
who studied, with Rubashkin in prison, who did their master's degrees, who came out with PhD. I mean, like they were given every opportunity.
No, but unfortunately, those are the exceptions to the rule, right? That's not the general rule. Unfortunately, the general rule is somebody's committed, whatever it is. I don't want to go into a whole long commentary about a prison sentence and whatever it is. But think about the idea that a society is built about the idea that even if you said we love you, and that is our default situation here. Even to the person who went ahead and did something that's potentially ruining somebody else's life. Right? But aren't we all guilty of speaking Lashon Hara? So it's so easy to be on this side of the judgment, right? And the concern is that, look, right now we all know something, right? I just shared a clip on Facebook, and I was very strongly debating about doing it or not, and I finally decided, okay, I'm going to share it. Here's a fellow who is absolutely convinced, you'll see the interviewer is absolutely convinced that they have all the facts. They look at all the numbers, and they're just being agnostic, and they came to a conclusion that Israel's committing genocide, right? Because Gaza is a parking lot, and 30,000 people are dead. And so it must be that Israel's committing genocide, right? Boom, right? The facts seem to point in that direction, right? Then, and to his credit, to the interviewer's credit, somebody else lays it out from a perspective, and the interviewer at the end says, you know what? Maybe I don't know enough. The fact of the matter is that Yiddishkeit demands of you that when it comes to your fellow Jew, that before you make the declaration, you put on your Kohen persona. Make the declaration from the side of the individual that loves this person. What happens if this person that you're about to sentence is your brother or your sister? Would you be so quick to rush to the judgment? And it doesn't mean that you would necessarily will give your brother or sister a free pass. Perhaps you're tougher on your brother or sister, but you're doing it out of love. That's a different thing. Right? We're tougher on our siblings, we're tougher on our own children, we're tougher on our spouses, whatever it is. But that comes from a position of love, which means that our approach to it is different. It's so easy to just write somebody else off when we don't have a sense of empathy to them. And the Torah says unacceptable. Now let's connect it back. You see, you ready? You ready, Les? You're ready? So that was the commentary on today's day, right? Now let's connect it back. You just threw in that idea about the last son, right? The last son is suffering from a terrible, terrible spiritual malady. It's called disinterest. It's a far more it's a far that child is in a far more dangerous space than the wicked son, which is why they're last. The wicked son is antagonistic, but engaged. There's plenty to work with, right? In fact, all you have to do is blunt his teeth, right? Blunt the fangs. That's all you need to do, right? That's what the Haggadah is saying. The Haggadah is not saying knock out his teeth, punch him in the face, right? 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 Exact divine retribution on this one. No. It's saying you got good material here. This one's engaged. Just defang him. Right? But then you have a child. Any questions? And have any questions? Nah. Well, nothing's moving you, nothing's interesting you. Whatever, right? That's the word of our generation. Whatever. Right? Whatever. That's a very, very dangerous situation. Because every child knows how to ask. The first thing a child knows how to do coming out of the womb is cry, because it's asking for comfort, it's asking for sustenance, it's asking for. That's the most instinctual thing that a human being has, is perhaps the only instinct that we have, which is to plead for to be put into a better and more comfortable situation. If we feel like we're missing something, we ask. A baby knows how to do this. So what does this mean, this child who doesn't know how to ask? It means it doesn't feel like it's missing anything. It doesn't know that it's missing anything. So there's so much that it can learn, so much that it can engage, so much that it can draw on the Seder night, and it's nah. And what does the Haggadah tell you? At petachlo. Open this child up. Interestingly enough, sorry, Les, the rest of it, the children, the Torah says, refers to you, right, in the masculine. About the She'ini Yudei Elishol, it says when dealing with this child, at in the feminine. You, that nurturing. This child needs special. It's not just finding the right narrative, not just finding the right words. This is a project. This is nurturing. This is going to take more than just information. This is going to take investment. At petachlo. Open this one up. Open this one up. Don't just say, okay, you know what? You're not interested? Fine, no problem, no problem. So that's it. I'll move on. Talk to the next one. We're not allowed to do that. We're not allowed to do that. What happens if it's not your son? You're seeing empathy. I mean, you're seeing apathy, rather.
Apathy, right?
And it's not your child. Right? You don't have the right to walk away from that child. That is your child. Because we are all one family. Kol Yisrael Achim. You don't get to walk away from that one. Oftentimes, a parent doesn't, the relationship goes whatever it is, and it's in this moment, it's not going to be the parent that finds the right words. It's going to be their spiritual aunt or uncle. It's going to be somebody else.
That's
touch.
assuming that the parent cares.
So we're saying that, of course, first and foremost, the Torah, of course, is talking first and foremost to the parents. You got it to Levin, but also to understand that but that does not exempt you, the passerby, as it were. Say, not my problem, not my kid, not my kid, not my problem. Right? Again, take the tzarat, the mitzorah, to the kohen, who would feel the responsibility for this individual, even though this individual is not necessarily related. But a kohen looks at every single one of his fellow Jew in the way that God looks at every single one of his as his own children. And so,
As Ahavat Yisrael.
That's what it is. What is Avat Yisrael? V'havta l'reacha kamocha. How do you love your fellow as you love yourself? How do you love your fellow as you love yourself?
You give yourself every break possible.
No, how do you love your fellow as you love yourself? Oh,
That's what I'm saying. You give yourself every
but
break
what happens if you
possible,
don't
so
know
should
this
give it to
person?
your-
What
so
happens
you
if you
give
don't
it to
know
the
this
other.
person? What happens if you do know him and you don't like him? How do you automatically come to love every fellow like you love yourself?
That's what I just said. You give yourself every
No, not
excuse on
what I
this
mean
book.
to say is not the execution of that. What you're giving me is the execution of that.
Oh, okay.
I'm telling you, how do you get into the mindset of truly loving somebody who you don't know, or even harder, somebody you do know and you don't like?
That they're all God's creations and they're all children of God and of Hashem, and then we have compassion for them because we look at ourselves as not being perfect.
Well, so Carrie, yes, but I think I'll speak for at least for myself. I wish I was saintly enough to be able to exist in a space where I see God in everywhere and everything. And yet even if I'm not there, I still have the obligation. So how do I look at somebody? And so the Torah says, and it is not that hard because it is a simple equation. There is a group of people that you may not like, but you still love. Who is that person?
Who
Boy,
is
is
it?
my list long.
Exactly.
Wait a
Oh my
minute.
God.
Who you may not like, but you still love.
Well,
Mhm.
certainly a family member because
Ah,
something.
very good, Diane. I want to tell you something. My father has the most interesting relationship with his younger brother. They're polar opposites. My father is a very down-to-earth, kind of non-dramatic type of person. Doesn't really like that. It's just salt of the earth kind of guy. His younger brother is like the opposite, and it's beautiful. It's like how, and pretty much for the most part, my father's conversations with his younger brother end as follows: Shalom David, you're a schmuck, and hangs up the phone. And they call each other multiple times a week. Now, if this is a person who your verdict time after time is you're a schmuck, why are you picking up the phone and calling him again? What do you mean? Because he's my brother. I love him, right? How many of us have that general kind of right? Manis Friedman has a whole thing, and he has a lecture. I thought, again, he's always brilliant and encapsulated. Says how to like those that you love, right? There's a whole lecture on how to. Why do you love this person? How could I not? He's my brother. He's my sister. He's whatever it is. Exactly. That's every Jew. That's every Jew. That's every Jew. Now, it doesn't mean you necessarily like them. Of course, you should work on liking. But what that means is, of course, you're going to deal with them differently if this was your sibling. Now, it doesn't mean that they don't deserve it. It doesn't mean that this person will be exempt for being declared a mitzorah. No, the Kohen is going to declare mitzorah, but it should be the Kohen who declares mitzorah.
That's interesting because I always think it's God will take care of this part. I continue to love my family member and I say, well, they're going to live and whatever happens, God will take care of them. You know what I mean?
The answer is no. The Kohen's got to be the one to declare. If this person is a mitzorah, you have to declare because, again, your love will motivate you. Because once the Kohen declares this person a mitzorah, guess what? The Kohen is then going to do his best to help rehabilitate this person. because he was the one who declared him a Mitzorah. He's the one who sent him into exile. Now the Kohen, who truly loves him and cares about him and had to be the one to declare, is going to do his best to bring him home.
But can't you just not ignore the person or anything like that, like you say about your father, but live with that person being who they are? I mean,
Not
we all can't
necessarily.
be like us, you know.
Sure, sure. Love is going to be manifest, and that's why every the family relationships are complicated with a capital C. It would be a lot less complicated with a capital C if you didn't love them. And the Torah says, sorry, sorry, I'm going to complicate your life here. You cannot just go to the scholar who is otherwise ambivalent. You need to go to the Kohen who's gonna care enough to get complicated. That decisions are not always going to be easy. It's not giving you a monolithic response here. It's not saying, oh, you're going to go to the Kohen, he's always going to clear impure. Or pure, right? Just give you, let him off, right? No. The verdict's still going to be the verdict. It could be any type of verdict. You don't have a guarantee. The one thing you have a guarantee is that when the verdict comes, it's going to be for somebody who cares. So it's not, again, this is not about what the specific verdict is going to be. If this guy is guilty, then they're guilty. And at that point, love would be for them to go through the rehabilitation and become a tzarat, or become a mitzorah, and feel what it feels like to be ostracized from society. And develop a value for the tight bonds that a society has and what they threatened when they said Lashon Hara, etc. What it doesn't mean that it becomes if you do it with love, all of a sudden it becomes far less complicated. It becomes so simple and clear. No, in fact, if you do it with love, it probably becomes significantly more complicated. It's generally the harder way than the easier way. Easier way is to declare a verdict and move on. And the verdict could be, it's not my problem, right? And move on.
No, it's not.
And the Rebbe turned to a whole bunch of his Hasidim and says, you guys are all here in Brooklyn, and there's a whole Jewish world out there, and you can very easily say, not our problem.
No.
Right? It's not our problem. We will preserve Judaism right here, and Judaism will thrive because we're here, and we're going to focus, and we're going to do, and now what's going on out there is not our problem. And the Rebbe says, sorry, you don't have that luxury.
No, of course not.
Because that's your brother and sister out there.
Right.
And that's that fourth child at the Seder. Maybe it'll be the parent that engages them, and maybe it'll be somebody else from the outside that will engage them. But in general, the attitude is, and again, it doesn't mean that you have to spend your life finding projects, right? Walking around and finding people that are your next project. But it does mean try to look around at your fellow Jew through the eyes of the Kohen. Put those glasses on. Put those glasses on. At least in the moment right before you pass judgment. All right, everybody?
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Very, very heavy. Very
It
heavy.
is. It is. It is. But a lot to think about. I will say one thing that I think we can all agree, that if a dose of this landed in society, the society right now would look a lot better than it currently does. And we all have to, whatever we want to see out there, start with yourself.
You know, they talk about hard lessons. What you just did was about the hardest lesson. I haven't learned it. I don't agree with it, but it ain't easy. And it ain't easy. It's a hard lesson.
It is. Look, and that's Torah definitely doesn't shy away from saying something that will force you to A, rethink a lot of what you've already established, and B, maybe go in a direction that is going to take a serious effort and expenditure of whatever. But the point is just simply from the fact that the Torah says when you potentially have tzarat, go to the Kohen. All right.
Thank you, Rabbi.
All right.
Thank you.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Bye.
Shabbat shalom.
Good
Bye-bye.
Shabbos, everybody. Thank you, Rabbi.
Good Shabbos. Good Shabbos.